So, welcome everybody. You have joined us if it's your first week here in the middle of a series called Lean and Depend, in which we are looking at the spiritual discipline of prayer and fasting and how we might be a people through those things that encounter the presence of God and see the region transformed. So just in case you've missed a couple or it is your first week today, let me just catch up on where we've been so far. The first week, we looked at the invitation to pray, and we explored the relational nature of prayer. And we thought about how prayer, our prayer lives, are the confidence of the adopted. And by that we mean we've been adopted into the family of God, and so we get to approach the creator of heaven and earth in prayer. That's an amazing thought. Lots of people pray. Atheists sometimes pray. Agnostics pray. Muslims pray. Lots of people all around the world pray. But it's only Christians that get to call God Father. Secondly, we looked at persistence in prayer with James, and we thought about how we keep on going and we don't give up in our prayer lives. And then last week, Brogan looked at prayer as spiritual warfare, and how about prayer isn't just about being on the defensive, but about being on the offensive, that we might see the kingdom of God come in our workplaces, in our schools, in our streets, and across the region. And we thought about the armor of God. And today, we are looking at the discipline of fasting. Now, for those of you that know me, you will know that I love food. I love cooking it. I often say if I wasn't a vicar, I'd have loved to have been a chef. I love eating food. I love serving food. I love sitting around a dining table with friends. It is one of my favorite things to do. At the vicarage, I have a huge collection of cookbooks in the kitchen, loads, like just shelf after shelf of cookbooks. And there was once a time when Ellie was slightly concerned about a mild addiction I may have had to wandering through town and just looking at the latest cookbooks that were in the shops. And I think that the reason that we love food is that food is more than just sustenance. It's more than just sustaining us. When we eat, particularly when we eat with other people, it's about connecting with one another. It's about celebration. It's about making memories. I don't know about you, but some of my strongest memories happen, really vivid memories, happened around a dining table. In the last few weeks, as we've had dinner with friends, Ellie and I have wept together, we've cried together, we've laughed together. Stuff happens when we eat together. And Jesus, too, loved food. It's often said about Jesus in the Gospels that he's either going to a meal, at a meal, or leaving a meal. He loved food so much that the Pharisees, actually in the Gospels, named him a bit of a party goer. There's that, they try and throw accusations at him. Well, Jesus is a bit of a party goer, isn't he? He's always dining. He's always eating with sinners. In the book of Isaiah, Jesus promises us that in eternity, it's going to be like having a banquet laid before us where we get the finest wines and the best cuts of meat, and it's going to go on forever and ever and ever. Who's up for a bit of that? So, as we think about fasting in light of that, let me say that we are also a people who are called to practice the spiritual discipline of celebration and feasting. We are called to be a party people. One of the reasons I think food is so evocative for us, it's so amazing, is that it's sacramental. And by that I mean, whenever we sit down to eat together, this is true even if you're a vegetarian, something has had to die in order for you to have life. A bit of wheat, a grape, a steak, not a steak doesn't die, a cow to give you the steak. Something has had to die in order to give you life. So when we sit down to eat together, it should be a daily reminder, possibly 3 times a day, that Jesus Christ died that we might have eternal life. We are called to be a people that feast and celebrate. Do you know that back in the day, in the early church, according to early canon law, if a member of a church was found to be fasting on a feast day, and every Sunday is a feast day, if a member of a church was found to be fasting on a Sunday, it would have been a matter for church discipline. This, by the way, is when we think about Lent, we think about it being 40 days. The actual time span of Lent is 46 days. And the reason is that we don't count Sundays as part of Lent. So if you're fasting in Lent, you can feast on a Sunday with a completely clear conscience. This was particularly true for priests. So if priests were found to be fasting on a Sunday, it was to be brought to the attention of the bishop, who was to discipline the priest. So we're called to be a people who celebrate. There's one particular bit of early church law that I really love, and it says this: it's illegal for a priest to be found gloomy at a party. Now, isn't that fantastic? Now, church, you have full permission. If I am ever at a party with you and I look gloomy, you can remind me, Ben, priests should not look gloomy at a party. It was a matter for an early form of the clergy discipline measure, a CDM. So we are called to be a people who fast. However, even as we're called to be a people who fast and celebrate, and we must learn to do that more, we're also called to be a people who embrace the spiritual discipline of fasting. And we'll see why as we go through these verses together. Now, when we think about the spiritual disciplines, we tend to think about prayer, our quiet time, Bible reading, private worship. And there's some spiritual disciplines that we don't think about at all. And I would suggest that feasting and fasting are two of them. And today we're obviously looking at fasting. And the reason that I think we don't think about these things is because we don't properly understand them. And so we don't engage with it. And this is particularly true in the Western church. And dare I say it, it's particularly true in the evangelical church in the West. In lots of parts of the world, it's a very common spiritual practice for Christians to fast and for Christians to feast. But it's kind of been neglected over here. Did you know that it used to be true that every Anglican was encouraged to fast every single Friday? It was like a day of fasting for the whole of the Anglican communion. And when John Wesley was around and these Methodists that he was leading, Methodists were expected to fast twice every single week. There was once a very famous complaint that John Wesley made where he complained about there being so-called Methodists who weren't to be found fasting twice a week, these so-called Methodists that don't fast. And he went on to complain about not only are they not fasting twice a week, they're not even fasting twice a month. And not only are they not fasting twice a month, but some of them aren't even fasting at all. So fasting was a spiritual discipline that everybody took seriously. And now, sometimes we turn fasting into a bit of a joke. Like I've been known to say, when the Wi-Fi's gone down at the vicarage, we'll just fast Netflix for a few days, Ellie. Or, I'm in a rush, or I don't have time to have lunch at work, and so I just make a joke that I'm fasting. And we all do that, but Jesus is inviting us into this act of grace of fasting so that we might know his presence more. Now, as we go through these verses, I want to make something really clear. We don't fast to please John Wesley. Well, we can't, he's dead. But we don't fast to please the vicar. We don't fast to fulfill all righteousness. We don't fast in order to look holy. We don't fast in order to get closer to heaven or closer to earning a place in heaven or whatever it might be. We fast that we might know the presence of God. And we'll see how as we go through these verses together. Bishop J.C. Ryle, who wrote some fantastic stuff on the Gospels, this is his one on Matthew's Gospel, he describes fasting as this: an occasional abstinence from food in order to bring the body into subjection to the Spirit. Occasional abstinence from food in order to bring the body into subjection to the Spirit. So as we go through these verses together, I want us to look at three things. Firstly, the motivation for fasting. Secondly, how fasting is actually feasting. And thirdly, some practical applications for us on fasting and how we might adopt the spiritual discipline as a church family. So what I want us to think first about is motivation. So in these verses that Rachel read to us from Matthew 6, verses 16 to 18, what Jesus is primarily dealing with is motivation. So if you've got the Bible passage open in front of you, look at verses 16 and verses 18. And in both of those verses, Jesus uses this word reward. Reward. And as we look at that word, we're supposed to ask the question, what are we motivated by? Are we motivated by man's reward, or are we motivated by affirmation from the Father, which is God's reward? Now, what motivates us is really important. What motivates us, if that's exposed, it exposes our main driver. What motivates us can even expose what we worship. And this is what Jesus is wanting to get down to in these few verses in Matthew chapter 6. And even when I was spending time thinking about this talk and praying through this talk, I was challenged on my motivation. So yesterday I was with Ellie and Libby, and we were at the vicarage. And, this was on Friday. And Libby suggested that in the afternoon we might walk, the weather was nice, that we might walk down to DeMayo's in the Oosburn to get an ice cream. And I thought, that sounds nice. I love DeMayo's ice cream. And I thought to myself, if I could just work through these verses a bit more quickly, then at 2 o'clock I could go down to DeMayo's and get an ice cream. And suddenly getting an ice cream became a motivation for working through these verses. I was challenged on my own motivation. It exposed something in my heart right there and then. Fasting exposes our idols. It shows us where our hearts are. It shows us what or who our hearts are orientated to. It shows us what we love the most, things on earth or the things of God. And what I really would long for us to grasp as a church family this morning is this, that our motivation for fasting should not be because it's come up in a sermon series. Our motivation for fasting should not even be because we need spiritual breakthrough. Sometimes I fear that I and others only fast because we really need to see a breakthrough in somebody's life, or we really need to see healing, or we really need this obstacle to be removed. And so we call a day of fasting or an afternoon of fasting or a week of fasting or whatever it might be. Now, some of those things are not bad reasons to fast, but we should fast for one reason and one reason alone, because God is glorious, because he is worthy, because he is beautiful. If we only fast in order to get something, spiritual breakthrough, a new job, we've got a job interview coming up, or somebody in our family is sick. If we only fast for those reasons, then what's being exposed in our heart is that really we're fasting to use God. That we see him as somebody to be used or manipulated, or we might even be able to bend or twist his arm into getting what we want. If that's the only reason that we fast, and it's appropriate to fast for some of those things sometimes, but if that's the only reason that we fast, then what's being exposed in our hearts is that we think God is somehow under our control. However, if we fast just because we build it into our daily discipline, and we fast because God is beautiful and he calls us to, and we just want to spend time in his presence, well, that's a totally different thing altogether. John Piper put it like this: we fast to fuel longing for more of God. Jesus said to his disciples later on in Matthew chapter 9, that he would ascend and he would leave them. He was going to send the Holy Spirit, but he would ascend, and after that, his disciples should fast. And the reason that Jesus said that is because fasting would increase the disciples' longing and yearning for Jesus' presence again. And so as they fasted, they were to be reminded that Jesus is all we need. Jesus is all we want. And so they would be encouraged to pray, "Come, Lord Jesus, return to us, Lord Jesus. You are all we need." Fasting is supposed to intensify that ache that we have for God in our lives. So what's our motivation this morning? Jesus highlights in this passage two different motivations, doesn't he? Motivation from man or motivation from God. Now, Jesus says in these verses, the reason that he uses fasting and motivation in the same passage is that Jesus wants to highlight to us what is the core motivation in our lives. Why is it that we get out of bed and do what it is that we do? John Mark Comer says that fasting, more than any other discipline, reveals the things that really control us. Now, the things that control us are usually the things that motivate us. So a question for me today and a question for you today. What is it that is motivating you? Who is it that is motivating you? What drives my actions and my decisions? Is it the approval of others? Is it for worldly affirmation? Is it so that I might look good? Is it so I can be noticed? Is it so I can be popular? Or, as Jesus wants us to work towards, is the motivation that I might hear the affirmation that the Father speaks over me every single day? Now, if we're honest, the desire for external affirmation from others, from man, is so strong, isn't it? It can be so overpowering. I meet and pray with so many people who are just looking for validation or affirmation from a particular person in their life. It might be an absent father, or a negligent parent, or a long-lost relative, or whatever it might be. And the desire for affirmation can become so strong, it can become overpowering. And we live in a culture that celebrates immediate gratification and recognition. Social media has just served to amplify this over the past few years in the forms of likes and shares and comments. Even in social media apps that pretend to be real, like Be Real, I've just noticed that Be Real have just introduced another thing into their little trick to get you addicted to it. Whereas if you have a certain amount of streaks on Be Real, or you do a certain amount, you react with these real emojis to other people's Be Reals, they'll let you unlock like one of these moving real emoji things. I don't know if you've seen that. It was launched a couple of days ago. And so you can react to people with like a moving emoji thing. All it's doing is getting us addicted to instant gratification via man's approval and recognition. This has become so bad that the US Surgeon General has declared the impact of social media on children's mental health, this is in the United States, he's recently just declared it last week, a national emergency. And he's calling for urgent measures. And in his report, he talks about how teenagers are spending over 3 hours a day on social media, with the average time being 4.8 hours. Now, imagine what you could do with 4.8 hours. Now, all of us, if you've got a smartphone, I think most Android and Apple phones have a little app built in that will tell you how long you've spent on different apps every single week or every single day. I dare you to have a look at it after church today and see how long we've all been spending on social media. The Surgeon General has actually suggested warning labels on social media apps to inform users of the potential harm to their mental health. Now, it's not that social media in itself is actually a problem. I don't think Instagram is inherently evil already, in itself. The problem comes when we use it to get our affirmation and sense of identity. And the problem with all of these different apps is that they hardwire into the software, if you like, the fact that you need to interact with affirming others, likes, love hearts, reposts, emojis, whatever it might be, and they hardwire that into the software, and that then becomes your motivation for using it. And so some of you may have done this. You may post something on Instagram or on Be Real or whatever, and then you wait and see how many likes or reactions or comments it gets. And so that affirmation then sends us into a complete and total tailspin. Jesus, however, calls us to a totally different standard when it comes to motivation. We should be motivated by one thing and one thing alone: hearing the affirmation of our Heavenly Father. Look at what Jesus says in verse 16. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they're fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Now, what is their reward? It's the fleeting, passing affirmation of man. So what Jesus is saying here is this: when you fast, don't go all around looking somber. Don't make your face look like it's really sad. So, you may come to church and you want other people to know that you're fasting, and so you make a point of really not getting in the queue for, well, we don't do biscuits anymore, but you know what I mean. You're not going to get in the hospitality queue. You're going to turn down that coffee that Don Llewellyn's offered you on the way in, and you're going to look really sad and look like you're really desperate for that Sunday roast when you get back from church. Well, if that's what we do, then we've received our reward in full. And what's the reward? The fleeting, passing affirmation of man. Someone may think that you're holy just for 10 seconds, or they may think that you're just a hypocrite and putting on a show like the Pharisees did. But that will be our reward. That will be all that we get. But as I've said, the allure of human approval, the desire for it, the need for it is so strong that it gets control of the human heart. Imagine attending a party. It's a party that someone's put a lot of time and effort into planning, and there's a dress code, and there's this amazing feast. And you turn up at the party, and you want everyone to know that you're fasting, and so you walk around making a show of the whole thing, and standing near the food but not eating it, and complaining about the amount of cake and all of this kind of thing. It would be absolutely absurd, wouldn't it? If we do that, though, all we're doing is exposing what motivates us, that we want external validation. And this is what the Pharisees did all of the time. I like to think, by the way, that these verses are why it was written into canon law that it was illegal for a priest to be found gloomy at a party, because it stops clergy from having this sense of false piety that they're better than everybody else, and so we're going to look absolutely gloomy all of the time because other people are having fun. Well, we're supposed to have fun as Christians. It's a joyful, celebratory faith that we have. If we can't party, then no one else has a reason to party at all, because we worship the King of the universe who loves us so much that he died for us and rose again. And that's just as true when we're fasting as it is when we are feasting. When Ellie and I got married, we did marriage prep now 13, 14 years ago. The people that did our marriage prep encouraged us to come up with a series of values for our marriage. And one of the values that we came up with was the value of generosity. And that's become something that we talk about quite a lot, and we try and model that with other people, and we just try and live out this value that God has given us, that we're to be a generous people. Now, because it's one of our shared values, I also try and put it into practice into my daily life. And I'm just going to be vulnerable with you here and expose some of my own motivations. When you have a value like the value of generosity, it's a fantastic thing to have. But unless God motivates that value, it can very easily become a cause for stumbling and for sin, just, trying to impress others. So sometimes, again, I'm just sharing this with you, not to sound holy or not holy, as you'll see, but just to be vulnerable with you. Sometimes I try and do random acts of kindness that no one will ever know about. Sometimes those random acts of kindness are pretty difficult to keep secrets. So one of the things that I really enjoy doing is, if you're out for dinner with a group of people, is paying for the whole bill without other people realizing that you've paid for it. It's an exciting thing to do. I love doing that kind of thing, and it's even better if you can slip off before nobody notices what on earth has happened. Now, left unchecked, that value can become something that you boast in, and the motivating factor could be to please other people, or to other people to think that you're really holy, rather than just doing it as an overflow of the generosity of God. And the first time I ever did this, I'll just tell you the story. The first time I ever did this, I was a university student, and a group of us had gone out for a meal. And it was a lovely meal. There was a handful of us there, 6 or 7 or so. And we went out to this restaurant in Sheffield, and we had starters, main course, dessert, and drinks. And just as the desserts were arriving, I pretended that I needed the toilet. And so I slipped off to go to the toilet. But what I really did was go to find a waiter to pay the bill. Now, that same waiter that I'd paid the bill to came over to collect everybody's dessert plates. And somebody on the table asked if they could have the bill. And the same waiter that I'd been to just looked at the table and said, somebody's already paid your bill. And I sat there waiting, for somebody to notice, or for the waiter to give a cheeky little nod and a wink at me so that everybody would know that I'd paid the bill. And it didn't come. And then somebody asked, well, who did pay the bill? And the waiter just said, an anonymous donor paid the bill. They've gone. And I was like, I'm right here. I'm literally right here. This waiter played a completely straight, poker face the entire way through. Now, everybody was absolutely chuffed that their bill had been paid for, and they left none the wiser. Now, in that moment, why did I pay that bill? Now, on one level, I was trying to enact the generosity of God that I wanted to be a value in my life. But in another way, I was doing it so that other people might think, oh gosh, he's generous, or, think, thank you, Ben, that's really kind of you, or whatever it might be. And I probably walked home with a disgruntled face like Jesus is talking about here in Matthew 16. Now, here's the thing, church. The allure of human approval does not satisfy, and it never, ever will. All it did that day was cost me a little chunk in a hole in my student bank account. Now, surely there's a better way to be motivated and better things to be motivated by. So let's contrast that with the depth of God's approval. So in contrast, Jesus says, when we fast, we're to fast in a way that's invisible to others and only visible to God. So verses 17 and 18. When you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you're fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Don't make it obvious to others that you're fasting. Do it so that nobody will know. And God, your heavenly Father, will reward you. Now, this reward is so much better than the reward that comes from man, because it comes from the creator of all the universe, the one that we get to call Father. And the reward that we get is that we get to hear the affirmation and the delight that he speaks over us every single day. Did you know that the Bible says that God rejoices over you with singing? God rejoices over you with singing. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could all ask God as we fast and we seek the presence of God, God, what is that song that you're singing over me? I once baptized a man who was totally deaf, never heard anything in all of his life, and I baptized him, and when he came up out of the water, he told me that for 20 seconds he could hear music and a song, and this song being sung over him, and he thought it was, and I believe him, it was the song of heaven being sung over his life. He heard for those 20 seconds, and he's not heard again since. But he heard the song of heaven, his heavenly Father rejoicing over him. So the reason, church, that we fast is for one reason and one reason alone: for the glory of God, and that glory may be made known to us in our lives. Not to please God, not to please others, not to twist God's arm, not to get a nicer house in the new heaven or the new earth, just to hear the affirmation of the Father and for his glory alone. Now, if we can do that, we'll rediscover the original purpose of fasting, which is that it's actually supposed to be a feast. So fasting is more than just abstaining from food. It's about feasting on the presence of God. It's a spiritual practice that completely reorders all of our priorities, and it reminds us that our true sustenance is found in God and in God alone. When Jesus was fasting earlier on in Matthew's gospel, you can read about this in Luke's gospel as well. Jesus says to the devil when the devil tempts him to eat, "Man does not live on bread alone, but from every word that comes forth from the mouth of God." And if fasting is really a feast, if it's really about feasting on God's presence, that's why when we fast, we should not look somber as the hypocrites do. Fasting should be a joyous practice. It's a discipline that draws us closer to God. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom, and the joy of the Lord is our strength. And this is why John Piper talks about fasting to fuel longing. It's a joyous longing. And this is why we're to wash our heads and anoint our heads and wash our faces and all of that kind of thing. Because when we spend time in the presence of God, not only should we just wash our faces and anoint our heads, but when Moses spent time in the presence of God, his face was shining. It was completely radiant. And it's that people should see when we're fasting, not gloom, not abject, whatever it might be, disillusionment and negativity and all those kinds of things. No, they should see the joyous presence of God. When we fast, we feast on the presence of God himself, and his love is better than life itself. So how do we apply this to our lives? Well, very quickly, if we take fast, F-A-S-T, I've got 4 words for us on how we might apply this to our lives. So F is for focus. So we've already looked at this, but we fast to focus on God and not on others. If we're going to do this, church, I suggest that we all take a moment over the course of the next week, and you'll be discussing this in your life groups this week. How can you build in the spiritual discipline of fasting into your life? It may be that you have never done it before, and if you haven't, that's absolutely okay. Jesus doesn't prescribe how often we're to do this in the scriptures. We don't all have to be like John Wesley and do it twice a week, but we should start somewhere. So maybe we start just once a month, missing one meal, and taking that time to worship God, to read the scriptures, to pray, and to be in his presence. Just build from there. But we fast to focus on God and all that he's done for us in his glory. A, abstain. So when we fast, we abstain from food. Now, there are some reasons, some good medical reasons why some people can't do this. Will actually be speaking to us next week on Fasting Part 2, and he'll tell you a little bit about why he can't go he can't go for long periods and fast. There's some genuine medical reasons why some people can't do this. But what I want to be really, really clear about is that in the scriptures, fasting is abstaining from food. So fasting is not giving up Instagram. Fasting is not giving up drinking wine midweek. Fasting is not giving up computer games for a week. Do you know what all of that's called? That's just called growing up. That's called becoming mature. What fasting is actually about is giving up food that we might become hungry for the presence of God. Okay, S. We seek God. So during the time that we would have been eating, we use that time to spend time in the presence of God. You may want to journal or worship or read the scriptures, the things that I've already mentioned, but we intentionally seek God while we fast. And then T, we taste. And what is it that we taste when we fast? We taste and see that the Lord is good and that his presence is better than the best steak. It's better than the best Chateauneuf de Pape vintage bottle of wine. His presence is better than everything. And when we fast, we remember that Jesus is all we need. Now, all of this is ultimately about the gospel. So Jesus fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. And as Jesus fasted, he endured physical hunger. He resisted temptation to demonstrate his reliance on God and his authority over sin. And that act of fasting in the wilderness, of course, prefigured his ultimate sacrifice on the cross, where he fully emptied himself of everything, even separation from his Father, that we might feast on the riches of his grace and feast forever. Through his fasting and sacrifice, we can partake in abundant spiritual sustenance and joy in the restored relationship, intimate relationship with our Heavenly Father. Fasting is a picture of the gospel. So as I come into land and Brogan leads us through communion, some things to think about as we pray. What motivates us today? Man or God? How can we feast through the spiritual discipline on the presence of God? And what we're going to practically do to work this into our corporate life as a church and into our lives as individuals. And may we give God all of the glory that Jesus emptied himself so that we could be full and eternally satisfied forever. Amen.